Hi, I'm Father Charles, the rector of St. Mary's. It's been a while since I've been able to record. We, on this past Friday, tripled our bandwidth. So I think we might be back in business with doing YouTube and hopefully other things as we expand our online presence and worship. So this Sunday, we've heard from Paul in the letter to the Romans about loving our neighbor. And in the gospel, Matthew, we've heard about what happens when there are difficulties in the community. So we hear in Romans, love one another, love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no evil to the neighbor. Yet we also hear in the gospel then that this can be extremely hard to do. The gospel today presumes we're not all going to live up to who God calls us to be. Loving a stranger, loving a friend, loving a neighbor, refraining from evil doing. No doubt about it, sometimes this commandment can be difficult to follow, especially if your neighbor likes late parties with loud mufflers, or particularly when your friend wants to borrow your brand new sweater and your old fiance, especially if the stranger down the street is kind of scary looking. Experience teaches us that loving our neighbor can be risky business indeed. But for many of us, if we're honest, loving our neighbor isn't really the problem, is it? The battered wife who begins to believe that she deserves the life she's living. The desperate man whose face has been etched by times of bitterness and regret. Or the cutter, the secret cutter, that seemingly new phenomenon we're becoming aware of among so many teenagers who try to alleviate their pain with the sharp bite of a razor, cutting themselves and scarring themselves. The alcoholic who reaches for a bottle instead of a gun, knowing that either way, he'll eventually wind up dead. Sometimes loving our neighbor really isn't the problem. Sometimes the riskiest side of the gospel equation can be learning how to love ourselves, and yet accepting the truth that we are worthy of love is the key to it all. Made in the image of the Creator, our spirituality is always an embodied spirituality. Our response to God's invitation is always an embodied response. The physical human body isn't an object, it isn't a machine or a device designed for manipulation or pleasure, just or abuse. It's not an empty, worthless husk, useful only for housing the soul. We are integrated beings, body, soul, and spirit. One spiritual writer described it as mixing flour and water to make dough. You can't pull them apart. In our lives, you can't isolate your soul from your body. Your soul finds expression in our bodies. And we, as body, soul, and spirit, reflect the abiding love of a creative God. This is the very logic of Christianity. God communicates God's own love to us in and through our bodies, our lives, our relationships, our experiences. Literally, the Word made flesh. dwelling in us and among us. We are the one religious tradition that says God, the creator of all things, took human flesh to live among us. Yet, how seldom do we see ourselves in this light as vessels of God, as tangible presences of God in our world, created for reverence and revelation, as children of God, worthy to be treasured and loved. It's so hard for us to accept, to love ourselves. Love your neighbor as you would love yourself. Love yourself as you would love your neighbor. Both sides of this great equation are challenging and risky, demanding all that we have to give. In this season of pandemic, of domestic crisis and struggle in our streets, in political division, which seems to be leading to violence on both sides, when our hearts and our hands reach out to strangers and neighbors whose losses seem beyond our ability to understand or even count, this commandment takes on a new urgency, a new challenge, a new invitation. Teresa of Avila talked about, it's her famous quote, Christ has no hands but yours, no feet but yours, no voice but yours. This commandment, then, to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, is urgent to finally get it right. For us to love ourselves enough that we dare to embody God's love in a hurt and broken world. May God give us the vision. May God enable us to open the eyes of our hearts and the ears of our hearts to see ourselves as He sees us, embodying the love of the incarnate Word in this broken, hurting world. May God bless us.